The RTÉ Rugby Podcast, sponsored by Canterbury. See the new Irish men and women's rugby jerseys at canterbury.com.
And you are very welcome along to this week's RTÉ Rugby Podcast, the final RTÉ Rugby Podcast of the season. We'll be taking a break for a few weeks coming up now because the season is done, and what a way to finish it. Ireland beating New Zealand for the first ever time in a test series. Just 7 days after winning for the first time in New Zealand, they went and did it again, 32 points to 22 in Wellington in the Cake Tin, and delighted to be joined by James Downey and Sean Cronin to chat through the game. Guys, how are you doing?
Very good, Neil.
Very good, Neil.
James, I think I'll be totally honest. The only reason I invited you here today was I needed someone from outside of Limerick, because otherwise I was just probably going to spend about 30 minutes chatting about hurling with Nugget here. So look, no offense. I just had to bring in someone who wasn't from Limerick. Is that all right?
Here, look, you just brought in someone who's used to winning. The Dubs have just so many, you know. It's good to give it to someone else.
It's all right, yeah. Now look, we'll get into the rugby in just a couple of moments. We'll get into the recap of the match. First, though, obviously we had live commentary on RTÉ Radio 1 of all these games across the last few weeks. And after the match, Michael Corcoran got to chat to a few of those involved down pitch side. First, we will hear from head coach Andy Farrell, and that's going to be followed by Peter O'Mahony. Have a listen.
Andy, we're at the side of the pitch. It's almost impossible to hear each other. We probably shouldn't be standing this close. What a day, what a result.
Who cares? Who cares, Corky? I mean, wow. It's a special day, isn't it? A special day for everyone. Back home, for everyone that's involved in Irish rugby, for everyone that's Irish, you know, this is pretty special. I can't speak enough of these boys, you know, they certainly keep surprising me, they keep turning up, and they 100% believe in themselves, you know, and to come over here and to get a series win against New Zealand, that must be the hardest thing in world rugby to do, and these boys have achieved that.
You challenged the players to have the game of their lives during the course of the week. They delivered that today.
Well, they knew they could do better, you know, we left 5 tries out there in the first test, and we was better in the second test, and we knew that we could play even better, and I think that showed in the first 40. But test matches are, especially against the world's best, they're always going to test you. That's what it's all about, and they came back like we knew they would do, but we stayed composed. Our maul was outstanding, our composure was outstanding, our defence at times was outstanding, and wow, I don't know, it's pretty special at this moment in time.
You were massively clinical when you needed to be in getting those scores, particularly in the first half.
Yeah, and that's the work on from the last couple of games, isn't it? Making sure that we're more clinical. Whether we played as well at times, you know, he got a bit loose, didn't it, with the high balls, etc. And they was playing wide, but we managed to find a way. And that's what good teams always do. That's what New Zealand have always done in the past, you know. And we managed to find a way to keep our composure for what is a tremendous day for everyone.
Just a final question. I mean, the noise in the background is coming from the Ireland fans. Can you believe it?
Well, I can't. Well, I can, because I was walking around town this morning, and the amount of people that's just flown in, you know, probably traveled 48 hours to be here just for this match, and just because they care, you know, I'm so pleased that it's worth every penny for them.
You know, it's you know, I was going to say it's something you dream of, but I used to get up early and watch the All Blacks play, you know. I used to be a fan, and you know, I don't know if, as I said, after losing 16-0 the last time I played a third test in New Zealand 10 years ago, if you'd asked me, were we going to win the series here in my career, you know, I don't know if I'd agree with you, but you know, standing here now, you know, makes me very proud of the group of people that I'm surrounded by and that I've toured with and I've trained with over the past 18 months, 2 years, and coach and staff, you know, people at home, you know, very proud.
When you consider the way that opening test went, I mean, what changed? What made you go and win a match last week and win another game this week?
Do you know what? There wasn't a huge amount of change. That first 20 minutes in that first test was probably one of the best we've ever put down. And then we fell off a couple of tackles, made a couple of bad decisions. You know, when you're talking about the best team in the world, arguably, the All Blacks, you know, they've individuals who can change games, and we knew for the second test that we were we weren't far off, and obviously you go and win in first time ever, and there's lots of people who say, oh, that's them after blowing up now, because that's the first one, and the effort and emotion that takes. But we've got away from the emotion side of it. We've got really to our process side of it and our performance side of it, and we said, you know, it's not about the emotion this week, it's about performing to the best of your ability, and you know, there was a lot of guys out there probably played some of their best games for Ireland, and that's what it takes over here.
You know, people were talking during the week about how much the All Blacks could improve and what they could bring in terms of last week, but people seem to forget that Ireland could improve as well.
Yeah, look, that's the thing. That is it in a nutshell. You know, there was people saying, "Oh, the backlash," and you know, they're going to come out of the traps, and you know, back at home. Yeah, we talked about all that. You know, we talked about, you know, what if we lost at home in the Aviva? How would we feel, and what would we do? But we also said, like, you know, what didn't we do last week? How could we improve? And you know, we were really calm at times, but we got a bit frantic. What if we're calm all the time? And you know, you concede a few tries after half time there, and you look around the circle and it's pure calmness, and you're going, geez, this is different animal stuff, you know. So look, we've come a long way. We've come a long way from certainly the 16-0s, but I think the most pleasing thing is that we look back in the game and we look at areas that we let ourselves down in. Certainly our first up tackling, some of our line out defence. You know, there's plenty more in this Irish team, which is great.
This means a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, of course it does. Yeah, it has to mean a lot. It doesn't get a huge amount bigger than this with regard to World Rugby and Test matches, so it means a lot.
So yeah, that was Peter O'Mahony we just heard there, guys. And it's funny, Sean, I might go to you first, because I think the enduring image a lot of us are going to have now is that shot of Peter O'Mahony basically in tears inside in that final minute, when everyone knew the game was done and dusted and Ireland were down the other end of the pitch and there wasn't a chance New Zealand were going to come back. And he spoke after the match as well, and he mentioned how one of his first caps for Ireland was that 60-0 game down in Hamilton. I know you were involved in it as well, and look, you know, it's just the way he was saying that after that match, the thought of beating New Zealand once in New Zealand, let alone winning a series, seemed so far from his mind that it probably wasn't even a dream he had. It is incredible when you look at the progress over those last 10 years, to the point where not only have Ireland won a game in New Zealand, but actually done it twice in a week.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Neil. Scars are still healing from that one. Yeah, it's scary to think 10 years ago. And like you said, I suppose the progress in terms of, if you contrast it purely between us and New Zealand, obviously going close in 2013, then moving on to Chicago, and then the couple of wins at home. But this is just on a whole different level, really, going to the toughest rugby environment to win in the world. Yeah, look, you could see from Peter's reaction. I think even I was kind of thinking maybe back to even the lines where, you know, he was captain for the first test and then didn't get in after that. And I'd say he probably had a few things, a few rights he wanted to correct, a few wrongs, that he wanted to correct in terms of that. And just to be the performance as well he put in throughout the tour as well. And you could see by his reaction, so much emotion. And it's just, I suppose, something that they'll look back on in years to come. And but like they've said afterwards, it's building towards something going on to next year and on into the World Cup. So absolutely incredible. But like Johnny and Pete and all the kind of more senior guys have said, that it's just a stepping stone to building for the Six Nations and the Novembers and the World Cup. So absolutely thrilled for them. And you know, to get over the line down there is something they'll look back on and with good memories.
Yeah, it was fantastic. And we'll talk about more about the team itself, James, in a few minutes. But just to continue on someone like Peter O'Mahony, who, like, he's 33 in September. He's someone who last year was knocking around the bench when you had the back row of Van der Fleer, Cronin and Doris. And he was making great impacts off the bench. And I think a lot of people maybe actually thought that was going to be his role going forward in the team for the next couple of years, where we'd have all that experience coming off the bench in the last 20 minutes of matches. But the form he's shown in the last 6 months, if you think about some of the just individual performances he's had, for Munster, you've got the game against Exeter and the game against Toulouse. I think the second test, and he was very good at the weekend just gone, but I think the second test was the performance of his life on this tour as well. If you take those 3 or 4 performances over the last 6 months, he's arguably playing the best rugby of his career now, isn't he?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that, because I think you look back and you say, was Pete going to be starting to be phased out? Was Tyg Byrne going to push into 6, and bring in one of the young guys into second row? But Pete has shut down his critics every week, and you mentioned those games where he stood up, and I think especially last week in that second test, when again we speak about the images that Sean mentioned of him crying at the end of the game, but that second one when he's in Sam Kane's face and he's just bringing it in the cold face, and that's what you need in these tests, and that's what you need going forward. You need the hard, tried and tested, and Pete brings it, and he leaves everything out there. You could see it. He's just, from where he's gone, Nugget mentioned it again, like from been losing 60-0, and that can ruin players' confidence, that can ruin players' careers, and we've seen it. Guys will go on, play one test, and that'll be it, and they're broken after a tour, especially at the end of a Northern Hemisphere season when it's been so physical and draining, and then to go down to New Zealand, like we beat them up here. It's in November. We're in the middle of the season. The Kiwis are normally, or the Southern Hemisphere teams, are at the end of their season. We're fresher. It's all these things, but to go down there and to do that, and for Pete to play as well as he did, like, deserves the break that he's going to get now. But for a person, as a human being, I think he epitomizes everything good about what Andy Farrell's brought in, and I'm delighted for him on a personal level.
Yeah, and he's always come across, Sean, as someone that just absolutely loves the big games in particular. If you look back at the games against New Zealand, like 2018 as well, that was one where he threw in an absolutely monstrous performance. He just seems to love that backs against the wall type stuff.
Yeah, and even performances from Munster as well, Toulouse. And like you said, the last 6 months, he's really, pushed on. He looks really, really fit, and he looks a good bit stronger at the moment as well, which is something I noticed in the games. But he loves the backs of the wall mentality. Like Jimmy said there about getting in Kane's face, and but it's definitely someone that probably been under pressure as well the last 12 months with that trio from Leinster playing so well and kind of solidifying their places. But he's managed to get in and hasn't looked back, and he referenced himself that game 10 years ago now, 16-0. So look, it's brilliant for him. Like Jimmy said, a lot of these guys will get a good rest, Pete included, and come back and try and attack next year as well with full of confidence after that tour.
Have either of you ever been lucky enough to be on the end of some of those verbals from him in training or in matches? I'm sure you have.
Yeah, look, he doesn't stay quiet, and I don't know what it's like up in Leinster now, but in Munster, certainly if there's a couple of fisticuffs, you get in a huddle at the end of training, and normally the lads have to have a little hug and a kiss just to kind of break the ice. So Pete was involved in a few of those exchanges, but that's what you want from a leader, someone who does it on the field, but also brings it to the cold face, and he's one of these guys that you would follow into battle. Look, obviously with Munster, they've been so lucky in having leaders before, natural leaders. I think there's a bit of a freshness, as Nugget mentioned. He's looked stronger and leaner, and just a bit of want in him, and I think he's not getting any younger. He's missed out on a few things with Munster. They haven't won anything. That's going to be there as well, and I think it's a big 12 months. It's a big 12 to 15 months. New coaching staff in Munster, but also World Cup around the corner too, Six Nations, and he'll want to certainly get something at the end of all this.
And Sean, then in terms of the team performance at the weekend, of the 5 New Zealand wins we've had now over the last few years, would this arguably be the most kind of rounded of the wins, if you think to the fact that maybe last week or in 2021, Ireland probably ran them off the pitch, but left so many chances behind in each of those first halves when they arguably could have actually won it by more and left a lot of chances out there. But if you look at the first half last week, they had probably 4 chances in the first half and they scored 3 absolutely clinical tries. And then, okay, New Zealand come back into it, but to have the resilience to actually just soak up that pressure and stop the bleeding and go down the pitch and score a try and then see things out the way they did in the last 10 minutes. In terms of just the collective 80 minutes of it all, it seems to have been the most rounded of them.
Yeah, for sure. And I even, speaking to people at the weekend after the game, and like I nearly go back and reference the second test where, you know, hand on heart, I think we could have won by more. Such was the collective performance. So I'd even go to say that some of the, over 160 minutes, some of the best rugby we've played in a long time. And you know, you like on the like in both games, you had guys playing 8, 9, 10 out of 10s, and when you get that from a squad, you're going to be putting in like really good performances. So it's definitely some of the best, like the best rugby in terms of attacking and defense and transition and our kicking game. Like we actually kicked more in the third test than they did compared to the first test. So all round complete package performance, I think. And that, I suppose that was, but it's so easy on the eye, the way we play the game at the moment. You know, you could see a lot of backslaps from the New Zealand media, the pundits over there. They really enjoyed the way that we took on the game down there. And I suppose that's the most pleasing thing from a supporter, where your team is winning and playing incredible rugby at the same time.
Yeah, and go ahead, Jimmy. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, just on the back of that, I think it's refreshing to see that when Andy Farrell came in and took over and Mike Catt doing the attack, that we saw a different brand initially, and then we're like, okay, can we continue this brand on into Six Nations? And we did. You know, I think everyone's happy with the way we're playing. Then it's okay, right, we're going into New Zealand. Can we play the way we've been playing, or do we have to change the way we're playing? And it goes to show we can play smart, but we can also keep playing and we can stretch teams. I think we're going to, if we come up against the physical side, if we're looking at South Africa and England or France, we might adjust accordingly a little bit, but I still think that the template, the blueprint is there for us to play at that tempo, at pace, moving it wide and stretching side, because we've shown that we have the players there to do it, to implement that game plan. And I think the coaches deserve massive credit for instilling that in the players.
Yeah, and Jimmy, like one of the questions that would have come up after the games in November, with the New Zealand win and the hammerings against Japan and Argentina, was, you know, is there another level for Ireland to get to in terms of performance and in terms of their game plan? Have we seen that now in the last 8-9 months? Have they actually found another 2 or 3 different areas that they've kind of worked on and developed?
I think we have. I think that we've just seen a confidence in how they want to play, rather than a Joe Schmidt specific targeting a certain area, targeting a certain play. I think the players are very comfortable in what they're doing. I think credit's got to go, especially to the forwards as well, who are not just static taking the ball on. They're able to tip it on. They're moving their feet. They're changing the point of contact. They're just much more of an attacking threat. And I think everyone's bought into that, and it's second nature now, which means we can add certain other things to what the attack structure needs to be. And look, conversely then, defensively, I thought, like, you go down there, you're going to be under pressure, and New Zealand had a lot of that possession, so it's going to be a huge defensive effort. And sometimes we were a little bit shaky, but I think overall we gathered ourselves together. There were leaders there who stood up and controlled it, and we brought superb intensity and line speed to that defence and put them under all sorts of pressure. Look, we did concede a couple of soft tries, yeah, admittedly, but at least they're trying things, one in attack, but defensively they're putting their bodies on the line.
Yeah, and I think no one more so in the last 10-15 minutes of that game, Sean, at the weekend than Tig Byrne. I can't remember the last time I've seen someone in a game as close as that to come up with 3 turnovers in their own 22 in the final 10 minutes of a test match. I mean, that was just some of the most remarkable defense you're ever going to see.
Yeah, I've been a victim of a couple of Tig Byrne poaches before, and you know, I'll never forget one time I was carrying on a bit of a half break and I landed on the ground and literally the ball was gone like that. Tig over the ball, gone. You know, definitely he's up there. He's up there, one of the best in the world at doing it. And just to get those key ones towards the back end of that game where, yeah, we were under a good bit of pressure. And he just came up with vital moments like that. And but even his ball carrying throughout the test was exceptional. His running lines, he took a lovely little loop off Johnny one time to go straight through. Very, very intelligent player, can read the game so well. And then backed it up with his work in the set piece, where I was going to say, when Jimmy was talking there about little tweaks, like the tweak in terms of the scrum from the first test to the second and third test, where we fixed things up, and then actually ended up being probably a bit more dominant in terms of the scrum work. So, which Tig would have had a huge part to play in. So all round, he just had an incredible tour, and another one who's come out with his reputation even more enhanced in terms of the world game.
Yeah, 100%. And Sean, then, like, if you were, as we kind of said right at the top of the show, you mentioned Peter O'Mahony and Andy Farrell and Johnny Sexton. We're all talking about what still has to come next year, Six Nations, World Cup. What would be the kind of 2 or 3 areas you'd be picking out of Ireland's performances over the last few weeks that they can kind of hone in on and just sharpen over the next year or so?
I suppose it's more in terms of how you approach the game, where sometimes I think we probably overplay at times when we run out of numbers instead of maybe looking at a kicking option. You saw it there in the first test where we kind of ran out of numbers and we forced a couple of passes, led to turnover, which New Zealand lethal off a turnover, ended up scoring. Another thing to pick up on what Jimmy said in terms of how we approach different teams, can we play like that against the France or South Africa? Can we sustain that for 80 minutes? Or do we look to kick more? Do we look to attack them in the air more, push them back and make them play out? I think it's more about how we approach different teams. It'll be an interesting way of looking at it in terms of how we go at teams, especially power-based teams, because a lot of areas of our game are looking really, really good at the moment. Our attack or defense, our line-out work, the line-out D got so much better as the tour went on. So it's more about an all-round approach to how we play different teams, and can we adapt to match them the best way possible.
Just on that nugget, like, I guess people are going to talk. I think you saw we rely so much on Porter and Tig Furlong, and they're coming off in 70 minutes. And everything about what's going on in there. You look at the French, you look at the South Africans, they changing after 55, they're out on their feet and they bring on these massive men. We don't necessarily have that, but do you think that is there trust there? Is there, like, are you happy with, like, are we relying on Cian Healy to come on? He doesn't seem to get too many minutes. We're relying on Finlay to play. Like, are they just leaving Tig out there? Because in a World Cup, they can't play every single game and every single minute. And it's still an area, I think, that we just need a little bit more strength. I think Jeremy Loughman had a superb tour. I think Tom O'Toole did extremely well as well. I think they did well, but will they get the minutes between now and a World Cup?
Yeah, look, I think there is key positions where we are probably walking a bit of a tightrope at times. Out half, front row. But look, we're running. There's no way getting away from it that we're running out of time between now and the World Cup. So it's about trying to get as many minutes into these guys as possible to try and, maybe next year in the Six Nations, maybe looking to get the likes of Tom O'Toole, Finlay Bealham, Cian Healy. Look, Cian's done it 118 times, I think. Look, I try and get the likes of Cian Healy or Tom O'Toole and Finlay Bealham minutes against an Italy, a Scotland, other guys to get game time in order to be ready to play in a World Cup, so that we can try and match these bigger teams around the 50, 60 minute mark. So it's definitely an area of concern, but something the coaches will definitely have to look at as we progress towards the World Cup next year.
If you're trying to pick out like the areas of improvement, like we're saying there, I think I always think back to 2018, and Sean, like, you could probably offer a hell of a lot more insight on that, where it felt from the outside anyway in 2018 when Ireland beat New Zealand. It was difficult for, I think, people on the outside to figure out where do Ireland actually go from here, because I think at the time the general consensus was Ireland were the best team in the world after winning that game. But as we've kind of been talking about here, Ireland have beaten New Zealand in a test series, but there are a lot more questions around it, like, can they live with the power of a France or a South Africa? Is it very, very good that that's something they can kind of chase over the next 12 months rather than be the team everyone is looking at figuring out how to beat?
Yeah, look, the thing about rugby as well at the moment, and going back to your point about 2018, it's constantly evolving the game. And I think what we didn't do well at that stage leading into the World Cup in 2019 was trying to evolve our game. Now, look, Joe was a fantastic coach, but I think his view was that we'll just keep doing what we're doing, but do it better. And, England came in 2019 and took us apart in the Aviva. And I just think we ran out of time in terms of, you know, Stuart Lancaster in Leinster is a massive guy in terms of coaching that I'd look up to because he's always looking at how teams are evolving. What are they doing differently? Can we do this? Can we do that? So I think that's something that this team won't leave happen to them. They'll see how the game's evolving, how referees are reffing a game. You know, like you saw throughout the test, the New Zealand and Ireland, how the breakdown, like New Zealand did not react to the referee's interpretation around the breakdown. These are all the little things that can, you know, make or break a team going forward into a World Cup. So these are all the key areas where Ireland will look to get better.
Yeah, and the breakdown, that was the massive one. You could see it. It was the penalty Johnny Sexton kicks just in between the second and third tries for Ireland, where it was Bowden Barrett clearing out beyond the ball. And like that was a penalty New Zealand had just consistently been conceding across those entire 3 tests. Is that an area then, Jimmy, that Ireland are actually really, really sharp on? The back row seem to generally be getting on the right side of referees.
Yeah, and I think that's down to the analysis that they're putting in off field, because the referees have such an impact. Every referee refs it so differently and has their own interpretation. And I think the team analysis that goes into how referees, how you speak to them, what they're hot on, what they're not hot on, what you can get away with. It's about pushing your boundaries, and you've got to adapt pretty quickly to the way the referees go and refereeing the game. You know, if he's going to be hot there, if you get caught once, that's it. You don't get caught again in it. If you're going past and he's going to ping you, you adapt quick enough. Or if the players aren't adapting on the field, someone gets that message on, right, he's been hot in this, he's not normally, let's react in this. Let's change the way we're going after the breakdown. Look, New Zealand just didn't do it. I think it's a case in point when you see New Zealand's captain being hauled off in a test with plenty of minutes left in the game, which just shows that they've been completely outplayed, completely outmuscled at the breakdown, and a massive area for Ireland to have a tick at the end of that. And it's about that consistency now going forward and bringing it in. Were we lucky with Northern Hemisphere referees? Maybe, and we're used to them, maybe, but again, November series, I'm sure there'll be some Southern Hemispheres, and we've got to adapt to those again accordingly as well, and see how we cope with that.
Does it say a lot about the Irish achievement then, lads? That like the reaction in New Zealand to it, like they're on the verge of having a complete investigation into how this actually happened, and it's not really in an insulting way to Ireland, because generally the commentary has been that Ireland were by far the better team across the 3 tests. And like, it's a massive compliment to Ireland with the reaction to what has happened down there.
Yeah, look, I think they set their standards so high, and look, Ian Foster's coming under a lot of pressure at the moment. It would be the first time in the history of New Zealand rugby where the coach could potentially be sacked. And just going back to Jimmy's point as well, is that the coaching is what stood out for me, just what my coaches had, looking at the way the 2 teams, like New Zealand did not adapt to the referees as the test moved on 1, 2, and 3. Even some of their attacking, it's just little things that I saw where Ireland were just so much better in terms of their detail. So it's I think the pressure he's coming under is warranted. And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, especially 15 months out from a World Cup. That it's just the level of coaching, the detail was just the main difference for me between the 2 sides.
Were you surprised, Jimmy, just kind of how basic a lot of some of the stuff New Zealand were doing was?
Yeah, it actually really was. You know, in saying that the pressure that Foster was under, fine. I think you look at how much the New Zealand team changed in the first to the third test. I thought they had their strongest 23 in the final test as well. And I had said, geez, that, you know, at the start, the coaches were out, there was COVID, there were certain things. So I thought this is a great chance to beat them in the first test and get it going. But look, ultimately they produced. They're just under so much pressure. Look, it's in front page, it's back page over there. It's everywhere. It's 24/7. They live, they breathe it. And there's huge areas of concern for them. One, in how they played, the way they played, because Ireland outplayed them. You know, it's not as if we tucked it under, a jumpers, played simple and won by 3 points and kicked penalties and beat them that way. It was a good brand of rugby, and New Zealand made errors that you wouldn't normally expect with a Kiwi side. So players are going to have a look at themselves as well. But ultimately, it's the buck's going to stop with the coaching staff, and it's a tough one. You know, 18 months out from a World Cup, it's it's a big call to make to have an overhaul. And people are talking, I've read as well about Joe Schmidt, obviously he's down there. Does he step in now? But Joe Schmidt didn't really couldn't fix any wrongs that were going on, it seemed to me, so it'll be a pretty drastic reaction. As Nugget said, it's the first time that someone will ever be sacked as an All Blacks coach. So look, the way they played, they're going to have to change it. I'm sure come World Cup, you'd expect it to be a different New Zealand side, as you always would.
Have South Africa set the seed of that kind of from the previous World Cup, where they changed things up midway through the cycle, bringing Rassie Erasmus? Are more countries, do you think, in the future going to be inclined to kind of see that and go, do you know what? A lot of things can change in the short term.
Yeah, maybe. I think it's going the football model, isn't it? We can get a reaction for a certain amount of games. How far out you want to do it, I don't know. But yeah, look, the way South Africa play, I think the way Rassie Erasmus went about it, I think he didn't change too much. It was a game plan that was pretty simple. They were extremely effective, obviously, but it was a pretty simple game plan that you could implement in that short period of time. I think, could a Joe Schmidt go in and do something? Yeah, he could simplify the game plan, all right, but then would they be easier to beat? I don't know. I guess time will tell if they do make that reaction. But yeah, no, there's certainly merit there in changing, but personally, this far out, I don't know. I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see that. The last few points, if you look at the tour as a whole, I've seen a couple of people mention about how it probably couldn't have gone any better from short and long-term point of view. If you think about how, first of all, you win the series, which is the first box ticked, but also just the wider things where they've had to be challenged enormously. If you look at the first couple of weeks and the injuries and the COVID cases they had, where players were being chopped around and really, really tested in games at short notice. They've been dragged around the place. They've, had to play a lot of rugby. Someone like, I think was it Kieran Treadwell, for example, actually played in every single one of the 5 games across the tour. And they lost a couple of games along the way. They learned kind of things they needed to improve about themselves. It just has been the whole package for them. It's been everything they wanted out of it.
Yeah, look, I think that's what he said. A lot of times I listened to Andy Farrell speak, it was about putting the lads under immense pressure. And, that's an incredible stat about Kieran Treadwell being involved in every game. And I think especially for those guys playing in the Maori game first up, probably very little time together, traveling. But then you could see the extra 12, 11 days they had between the first game and second game with the Maoris. They were so much better, a lot more organized. But it's been a huge success in terms of, I'd say, what Andy Farrell wanted to find out about a lot of these guys, how they react to being in a midweek game and then having to double up for a test match, the pressure of playing down New Zealand, being in contention to win the series towards the end of it. So, it's been a huge success. You always run a risk of putting a 5-game tour like that on where if things don't go well, they don't go well at all. So I'd say he's a very, very happy man, found out a lot about the guys, and coming back now as series winners, full of confidence and leading into the season next year.
And also then just the length of the tour as well, because obviously you lose 2 matches at the start. And I certainly heard a lot of players early on say the mood of a tour can change dramatically based on how those first couple of games go. And, I can imagine there was a lot of soul searching after those first couple of games. I can imagine the atmosphere mightn't always be good. How impressive was it that they managed to pick things up when you're away for that length of time? And, I'm sure people will be feeling homesick, things like that. It's very impressive that they managed to turn it all around to the point where they ended up going on and win the last 3 games.
Massively so. Absolutely. I think that's a crucial point. I think, like, as I say before, like you look at when teams come up to play us in November at the end of their season, they're fatigued, they're tired, and it's an easy way. This time we've gone down there, fatigued, end of the season, long season for players, and you lose the first 2, and you're completely right. Things can change. You can look inward, like Nugget mentioned, things can go from bad to worse pretty quickly. Like, can it be a 5-0? Can it be a bit of a thrashing? We'll lose every game, and then Jesus, whose reputation goes under, and players won't get capped again on the back of it. But no, they regathered, they focused, they drew a line. Like Nugget made some good points there about they hadn't more time together. They trained a bit more often, especially the midweek team. I think Joey Carberry was the other player who played in all five, or was involved in all 5 games. But to do that and to bounce back and to probably not get the rest that they got, but I think it's the mindset that Andy Farrell has instilled in this group. And I think it goes back to last November when Andy Farrell looks at it and goes, this wants to be a quarterfinal, semi-final, final, and the 3 games, and to take it like that, because obviously this is where Ireland fall down. And then to go down and to rotate some players and change players and to come away with the result, it's going to be huge. Like, it's a great momentum going into the next 18 months. It's a massive 18 months. And I think they've shown that if their backs are against the wall, if things aren't going well, if like they're losing players through injury, other players are there, but also they can recover quickly, and the head doesn't drop, and they have players to drag them through, because they can say, well, we've been in this situation, we've been to New Zealand, we've been away from our comfort zone and everything against us, and that's what's going to take in a World Cup to produce.
Same one to you, Sean. How impressive was it that they managed to just like turn that momentum around after the losing start?
Look, it was, and what impressed me about every game, we started really, really well. And you can see even in the last test where they were going to come out, they were pumped up, had lost the previous test, but we started well again, early try. I just think it's a huge momentum builder. Like I said, and Andy had set out to test these guys, see how they react on tour, being along, even though I know you said, Neil, about guys being homesick. I'd say the lads with kids at home are not to stay on for another couple of weeks. If I put myself in their mind frame. No, look, it's got to be massive for this squad of players going on into the next 15, 16 months, building into a World Cup, that they've went down there, being put up, like I said, put under the biggest pressure you can play under is playing down there. And yeah, losing those first couple of games, things can go from bad to a lot worse. So it's just so impressive that they bounced back and won that second game, and then leading into that third test, so they just saw the momentum, the magnitude of what was on the line to go on and win a series in New Zealand. And sky's the limit for this group of players going forward.
Final question then to both of you. Who would be the maybe couple of players from the wider squad and from like those Maori games who probably have really done their chances of being involved in this team over the next 12 months? No harm whatsoever with what they've done over the last few weeks. Not really the frontliners, but those guys who've been on the fringe of the squad and want to be making a breakthrough over the next 12 months. Who's stood up?
For me, it'd be, I guess, Treadwell. I think, from someone who doesn't start for Ulster necessarily, and to come in, and people were kind of questioning should Ross Maloney come in there, who played extremely well for Leinster this year and was unlucky. But I think his stock has certainly gone very, very high. Been involved in all 5 games, but also making that impact and showing himself around and being a line-out option and calling line-outs for the Maori games. It's not something he'd normally do. For me, he'd be the kind of standout player where it was like, oh, you hadn't thought too much about him. Obviously, he'd been in the Six Nations squad and stuff, but played Italy. But then you're kind of, is someone else going to be there? But he's certainly cemented his place in the wider squad. Certainly, if not, brought himself into consideration since we've lost an Alton Delan, a Quinn Rue, and Jean Klein falling out of form a little bit. And that's the position I think that Treadwell stepped up and really put his hand up and taken it with both hands.
Any other contenders, Sean?
I'd have two. Well, two. I'd have Gavin Coombs, who I thought was really, really good. Look, he had a bad injury towards the back end of the season. I think he's a fantastic player. And Kieran Frawley would be the other one for me. I think that he's all the attributes to try and push on. Now, look, Joey did fine throughout the tour. And look, I think that those two will have a good duel in the next 15, 16 months where, I suppose the thing about Kieran Frawley being in Leinster is will he get the game time at 10? But I think that he reads the game really well. He takes the ball to the line. He's a good kicking game. I think that he could be a key man to step forward and try and to be the backup for Johnny. It all depends on whether he gets the game time at 10 in Leinster, because obviously, look, guys have to be playing these key positions. So, Gav Coombs and Kieran Frawley, I thought, especially in those midweek games, stood out for me.
So would you think, like, you've played with Kieran obviously down to the last few years, would you think 10 is his best position going forward?
I to be honest, I don't know, Neil, because I haven't seen enough of him play there in big games. But from what I saw on the tour and from what I training with him and against him, he takes the ball superbly to the line, brings defenders in, puts guys through holes, and he's a good communicator, can see the game really well, maybe 2-3 phases ahead of where the game is at. Good kicking game, but again, it's all about getting game time in big enough games in the URC or the Champions Cup to try and see if he can progress on to the next level, which would be to back Johnny up and if something, like we said, walking that tightrope in certain positions, the guys, if they get injured, can he just fill in seamlessly then?
All right. Well, listen, that's where we'll wrap it up. Thanks a million for joining us, and enjoy the rest of the summer, fellas. Sean, enjoy retirement as well. I should have said it at the top of the show. I presume it's pretty much this week and next week is where you're really going to start feeling it now, when you're not having that preseason dread, I imagine, yeah?
Yeah, I'd say so. I all the lads were on holidays the last 4 or 5 weeks, so it hasn't been. But yeah, when they go back training and back into games. But look, I think I had a good innings. I hung around long enough, so doing a bit of coaching up in Dublin now with St. Mary's. So at least I'll be involved in the game that way. And
you'll be dishing out the preseason pain.
Yes, exactly. And might go back playing a bit of junior football in Limerick like Ian Keatley and Tommy O'Donnell. We never know. But no, shout out to the Limerick hurlers as well, Neil.
Yeah.
At the weekend. Still recovering from the weekend. So
great stuff. And Jimmy, thanks a million for joining us as well. Lads, have a great summer. And thanks to everyone who's been on the podcast this year. Thanks for everyone for listening as well. We'll be taking a break for a good few weeks. We'll be back sometime, I imagine, just before the new URC season. But from everyone here at the RTÉ Rugby podcast, thanks for listening. We'll speak to you again soon.
The RTÉ Rugby podcast, sponsored by Canterbury. See the new Irish men and women's rugby jerseys at canterbury.com.